not only is the gap between the true mid-majors and the high majors widening because of NIL, I also think the gap between your generic high major team and the very best teams in the sport is also widening. And I think that is why not only are we seeing less first round upsets from true Cinderellas, but are also, relatively speaking, seeing less upsets in the second round, in the third round.
Mid-majors get poached. Big time, top heavy teams have more money to spend than anybody else, and that gap only gets larger every single year. And then the portal, right? You just don't have continuity at some of these smaller schools.
Hey everybody, welcome to the EvanMiya College Basketball Show. I'm your host, Miyakawa, and what an incredible first weekend of the NCAA Tournament we just had. We're going to cover all over the next hour here or so, and we're also going to preview every Sweet 16 game that we will get in just a few days' time. John Martin from the Field of 68 is here on deck with me in a second to talk about some of the biggest moments from the first two rounds, preview some games, and get into the widespread reports about Cinderella being dead or maybe just sleeping and what that means for the future tournaments that we will have. That's going to be a very interesting discussion. Later on, Myron Medcalf will be joining me to talk about more games from this weekend and look ahead to more Sweet 16 matchups. Plus, in this week's Analytics Corner, we will revisit some of the bracket advice that I gave last week and how it's aging after the first two rounds. It's doing pretty good. A lot of great stuff for you guys, so let's get into it. All right, John Martin, thanks for joining me today. I had an absolute blast watching 4 straight days of action this weekend. I know that you were in DC for a couple days with Field of 68, taking it all in. We'll talk about general narratives about this tournament a little bit later, but let's jump right into the most stunning result from this weekend. Iowa, 9 seed, takes down Florida 73-72. This game was... we needed this result, man. It was so good. Iowa was ahead at halftime. They had a bigger lead till Florida clawed it back. And then we had this amazing kind of end sequence here. Isaiah Brown for Florida goes 1 for 2 from the line to go up 2 with 9 seconds to go. And then in the post game, Todd Golden basically says that their strategy was to try and foul up 2 with a 2-point lead. And ultimately they failed to do that. Cooper Koch makes an incredible pass to Bennett Sturts on the run, kind of putting him a 3-on-2 situation on Florida. And ultimately he bounce passes it to Alvaro Fulgaris in the corner. And if you actually go back and watch the video, as soon as Sturts makes that pass, he kind of makes a shooting motion and then just starts jumping up and down as Fulgaris shoots it. He was just, I don't really think I see that much emotion often from Sturts. Fulgaris makes the shot, and then Florida ends up coming back down the other end with Xavier Lee after the timeout. And he doesn't even get a shot up. I think if he gets a shot up, you hope Florida's bigs can get there for a rebound if he misses it. Does not happen. Iowa takes down Florida. So many great storylines from this game. What were your biggest takeaways from this dramatic win for Iowa over 1 seed Florida? Reigning champs are out of the bracket.
Well, first and foremost, I will not be going back and reliving that because it was a massive, massive lost bet, first and foremost for me. I don't mind saying that on the front end, but I'm mature enough to be able to recognize just the the quality of that play and everything that had to happen for it to happen. And then obviously at the end there too, the fact that Todd Golden kind of got an extra timeout because of I guess they were going and trying to get the time right. So he had so much time, and what it ended up being 4.9. I mean, that's a lot of time, and it looked like to me, Xavier Lee got the angle. I guess he just wasn't confident, in getting it over those 3 guys. But yeah, obviously a great win, and Iowa just kind of showing, I think, the power of good coaching more than anything else, because those guys are just like to run the baseline, like you said, from Koch, to hit Sturts on the run in stride like that, for him to, believe in Fulgaris. I mean, you're down 2. I think, I was actually watching it at a bar, and I was telling my friend, I'm like, don't worry, like, Golden's gonna foul. This is what I'm told he does. I've been waiting on this. He's gonna foul. Because you just kind of felt like in that moment, Iowa was just, they answered every punch. Like, Florida got up 4, I think, on 2 separate occasions. And you're like, all right, finally, here's Florida. They're gonna lean on them a little bit. They're gonna pull away. And every time, man, Iowa just they responded back with a big 3. It was amazing. But so you're thinking in that moment, if you let Iowa go for the win, they're gonna make the shot, and they did, and they made the shot. So obviously, again, I think Ben McCollum has the reputation as just one of the best coaches in this tournament. Has it been the most talented roster? No, but he's got a guy in Sturts who's on lottery boards for a reason, and he made the play to win the game last night.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think, Iowa hasn't necessarily played the most fun brand of basketball this season, but when you get them in this matchup, it really does feel like they are more of a Cinderella, or they have a mid-major feel to them, because that's where a lot of these guys have come from. D2 ranks, coming from Drake. Obviously, Bennett Sturts has far surpassed anyone's expectations of him when he entered Division I. He's been incredible, and so that's a huge part of Ben McCollum's success. But the last 2 seasons, you look back to last year at Drake when they beat Miami or Missouri in the first round. Again, just like a masterclass in coaching, and this was supposed to be a very even fight. Like, Todd Golden is one of the best coaches in the country. Obviously, won the national championship last year, and I think it's fair to say Ben McCollum outcoached him in this game. So what were your thoughts on that chess match in particular, and ultimately, Ben McCollum kind of winning that one and having the upper hand there?
I mean, that was the difference in the game. I mean, can I point you to an exact, like, oh, this is where he got the better of him, this is where he didn't get no, but it felt like Florida's bigs were pretty neutralized for the most part, and that's the area where I thought, like, as kind of has been the case with Florida all year, that's where they'd be able to make some hay.
Absolutely.
And they just, Condon struggled, man. Chinyelu was unplayable. I don't think I've ever seen Ruben Chinyelu look that bad. So I think that's probably where you'd start, is somehow, some way, he found a way to exploit those matchups. I mean, look, a guy like Fulgaris who's able to step out and make those threes, I think that kind of did a number on him. And then again, it's just the guard play from Florida didn't show up. And then when we probably look back on this, we'll say it was predictable that Florida's guard play was just going to be the hamstring for this team. But I did not see it ending in the second round. I did not see it ending there. I didn't think they were going to win the championship. I thought maybe, they get a rematch with Houston and possibly they win that one. But to see this end in the second round after being the SEC champs, definitely shocking.
Yeah, you touched on several key things there. Ruben Chinyelu finished this game with 0 points, 1 rebound, 0 blocks. And we're talking about one of the best defensive players in the country. You look back to the very first game of this season, Florida lost to Arizona. Chinyelu had 4 points and 1 rebound in that loss. So his performances seem to be very key in when they've not been great. And the last time he didn't score in a game period was more than a year ago. And, he's one of the best defenders in the country. He was a complete non-factor in this game. And when you talk about Florida's dominance on the, in terms of their bigs, it often comes down to the rebound margin. They've had just 4 games total this season when they have not out-rebounded their opponent by more than 5. And they were even on the boards with Iowa in this game. And so that obviously is a factor. And then kind of human element, we talk so much about X's and O's and numbers and whatnot. But Alvaro Fulgaris, just for him to be able to make that shot with his father who has passed away and wasn't able to watch this game, and his mom watching him for the first time in 2 years in person, like, just a really, really cool moment for him to have the confidence to ask for the ball, hit that shot, celebrate with his family afterwards. That was really cool. And, it's going to end up leading to this really awesome matchup with Nebraska. Let's go ahead and talk about that game, because I think a lot of people are saying this was probably the best game overall from the first weekend. Nebraska wins against Vanderbilt 74-72. This was just an awesome game, awesome ending between 2 really, really good, really exciting teams who have been great storylines all year long. Nebraska led for this whole game till Vandy kind of took the lead with 8 minutes to go, throwing punches back and forth late. And Nebraska had 2 kind of tip-ins off of missed shots to keep themselves in it and tie the game late. And then ultimately the winning play was Sanford passing to a driving Braden Frager to get the lead with 2 seconds left. And then you have one of the most memorable almost makes in tournament history, feels like. Very similar to Gordon Hayward's shot, Tyler Tanner with that one dribble, the half-court heave, and if you look at the stills of the ball, it looks like it's going in the hoop. That was just insane. What were your thoughts on this thrilling win for Nebraska over Vanderbilt?
I mean, it was a complete coin flip game all the way. I guess Vandy took a 3 or 4 point lead late on maybe a McLaughlin three. And I thought, all right, here we go. But again, I think there's some, the fact that these two teams are meeting is kind of poetic, because when you think about how they got here, it was by you get punched and you punch back and you answer every single time. Now, I feel a little sympathy for Vandy, Evan, because they probably, and I'm not the bracket guy, but they probably were better than a 5.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I feel a little for them, because you're probably not supposed to be playing a 4 in that spot. But again, I think if you're Vandy, you're like, hey, we'll take this matchup with Nebraska, right? Like we'll find a way to get this done, and had a chance, and Tyler Tanner was absolutely fantastic. But no, I think this the idea that one of Nebraska or Iowa is going to the Elite Eight it's kind of nuts to me. Truly. Because at no point I guess at one point we talked about Nebraska at the beginning of the season, maybe the first 4 or 5 weeks. We're like, all right, are they real? Are they contender? Because they started the season. What were they? 16-0, something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they started the season undefeated for quite some time. But Iowa was a team that we were just, I don't want to say clowning, but we definitely did not believe in at any, and it was the same, like it's Bennett Sturts and the Pips. This team is a first-round exit. Doesn't matter how good McCollum is. And so the fact that one of these teams is going to the Elite Eight is kind of like we don't really know what the hell we're talking about in the regular season for the most part. Because I would have never at any point watching them believe that, but it's true. And that is fun. Like Iowa and Nebraska are not, you would never accuse either of them of being a basketball powerhouse, right? And they're meeting in this game, and it's going to be a fever pitch for either program. I mean, Nebraska, as we know, has never won a tournament game until this year, and now they're on the verge, potentially. I think they're favored to win 3. So this is a lot of fun, and, it's a tournament where you don't have a ton of upsets, but you want stories, and you want good stories. And obviously, either one of these teams winning is going to be that.
Yeah, incredible theater. I think I had in early February, I think I picked Nebraska to go to the Elite Eight, and now they're favored to get there. So, I feel good about that one. But either way, it was unfortunate, like you mentioned, for Vanderbilt that they had to face Nebraska, and that either one of these teams had to lose this game, because they both really just performed well on the biggest stage. Tyler Tanner has been one of the most fun, impressive players this season. He finished this game with 27 points, 4 assists, 4 rebounds, or 4 steals, 0 turnovers. But on the flip side of the ball, Nebraska just got contributions from everybody. Like Sanford had 15, Frager had 15, Mass had 13, Buchtengel had 12. They are so connected, and everyone kind of can fill in wherever. I'm very, very excited for whoever wins that game between Nebraska and Iowa. Another big storyline from this weekend was Duke still without, in their first game of the tournament against Siena, without both Patrick Ngungba and Caleb Foster, and then even in their second game, still without their full roster. The big storyline obviously was the fact that they just barely got by 16 seed Siena. They were down 11 at halftime, down 13 early in the second. Now, if you had gone and looked at ESPN's win probability in this game, at no point was Duke never not the favorite. They were still, the lowest it got was like 65%. That just explains the talent gap. But they really were playing around with fire here.
Yeah.
Ultimately, Cameron Boozer finishes with 22 points in this game, a very productive game. But the last 2 games, both against Siena and TCU, they handled a lot more comfortably at the end. But Boozer, who has been more in a playmaking role even than earlier in the season because Caleb Foster's out, he's had 5 turnovers in each of the last 2 games, just looks a little bit more unsteady. They ultimately looked completely fine for the most part against TCU, but they're definitely not entering the Sweet 16 with the same amount of confidence as Arizona or Michigan. On the one line, your takeaways from Duke's performance here and kind of how this bodes for them against St. John's and potentially further.
Yeah, I think the TCU final is a little misleading.
For sure.
I mean, it was not a 23-point win for Duke. it's just in the context of watching it, right? It hit a point eventually where, and I don't know what happened with TCU. They missed like 12 or 13 straight shots. I mean, credit, like obviously we know Duke defensively is just on another level. They're fantastic the way they guard, but make no mistake, until Cam Boozer kind of took over there midway through the second half, that game was very much up in the air. Like TCU showed up. And not that Duke didn't, but I think Duke is just working through the things that they're working through, right? They're working through no Caleb Foster. They're trying to incorporate Ngangba back in. So I think they're just so reliant on great Cam Boozer. Like he can't really even give you good at this stage. Now that we're talking about Sweet 16, Elite 8, and on.
And he has been great for so many games this season, but there's been a run of games going back to the ACC tournament when he's not been great.
And it was like Virginia was right there, right? I mean, that could have easily gone Virginia's way.
Florida State almost beat them in the first game of the tournament.
I mean, it took everything not to lose to Florida State. So I don't want to. I'm not out on Duke by any stretch of the imagination. Don't mistake me. I still think they probably get to the championship game, but I think St. John's is going to give them everything they can handle. I bet St. John's +7. We're recording this on Monday. I bet them +7 Monday morning. This is a massive test for him against Zuby. I mean, that's a grown man. That's a grown man there. That's a physical team. And I just kind of feel like that's going to be a one-possession game. Either way, I truly do. St. John's is they're loving life right now. I mean, they're one of the hottest teams in the country. They're believing. So I still think Duke finds a way to win. But, man, I think this is certainly their biggest test physicality-wise. And I just – can you get great Cam? Can he take over against the St. John's midway through his second half the way he did against TCU? My guess would be no, but Evan, I've pretty much been wrong about Duke the entire season, so that would probably continue, and the Blue Devils win by 15.
Yeah, it's going to be a great matchup no matter what. Before we look ahead to the Sweet 16, I do want to talk about one other team in this first weekend, and that is Texas. Texas, as an 11 seed, has won 3 games in 5 days. This is by no means the most sexy, fun Cinderella, if you want to call it that you're going to have as the Texas Longhorns are talking about, for crying out loud. But they beat NC State just barely in the play-in game, 68-66. And then they beat BYU by 8. They beat Gonzaga by 6. And they have just really grown into this tournament after coming into it very much not one of the more convincing bubble teams. And in their Gonzaga win, Graham Ike had 25 points, just 3 rebounds. No one else got past 10 points. And Texas was the better team. And Vokatitis has really become the big story for this team. He's averaging 18 points, 11 rebounds in the tournament. You've got Dalen Swain, who has just been really, really consistent for them as well. In their past 6 games, Dalen Swain has had at least 13 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. Obviously, Tremont Mark and his heroics, Jordan Pope as well. This team is kind of sneaky good, and people, I think, who have been watching them for a little bit understand that. This is better than an 11 seed. I think they're going to potentially cause some problems for Purdue. Any thoughts on Texas and whether you think they have a shot to continue making this thing rolling?
Yeah, totally agree with you. I bet Texas +7.5 this morning. And I would say, they're definitely not a Cinderella, but they don't have as much money as probably the general public would think. I don't want to put the number out, but most of Texas's rev share, I would say probably 85 to 90% of it goes to football, right? And so that's the interesting thing is like, yeah, Texas has a lot of money, but it don't go to basketball. So they're operating on a budget that's probably a lot less than the general public thinks, even though they play in the SEC. But yeah, I mean, Evan, you know this. We see these teams that survive and they make the play in and they catch something. I don't know what it is, but this is a team that has been up and down all year long. They're playing their best basketball right now. Like you said, Vokatitis. I think Dalen Swain is going to give Purdue some problems, because I think about their point of attack defenders. CJ Cox went down, we'll see about him. I think it's ripe for a Texas upset here. I know Purdue has definitely figured it out, but again, that Miami game was closer than it was not a 10-point win. It was a 2-possession game until fouling, got it out of control. So yeah, I definitely think with the way that Texas has played the last week and a half with the guys they have, I think they're built to give Purdue some problems, and I expect that to happen.
Yeah, I think that absolutely could be a close game. I do feel like I'm a little bit on the other side of that, sort of where Vegas is at right now. I have Purdue favored by 9.5, and I think the big thing I look at, besides the fact that Purdue has been playing really well going back through the Big Ten tournament, is right now at EvanMiya.com, Purdue has the best offense in the country. Texas's defense, 68th best. There is a massive, massive gap there. Again, this could be a close game. I would not be surprised in the slightest, but I do think that Purdue is going to have their way more likely than not with Texas's defense. I think the more interesting game, if we're kind of looking forward to the Sweet 16 in that region, is Arizona-Arkansas. And when we're talking about like, man, I cannot wait to see how this unfolds. This is a game that I just have so much hope that it's going to deliver, specifically the whole Darius Acuff versus Arizona, most, steady team in the country, one of the best defenses in the country. I think this is going to be really, really fun. I know that you love Darius Acuff and watching him play, and obviously he was incredible getting Arkansas to the Sweet 16. It's going to be tough for any team to beat Arizona, period. And so tall task for Arkansas, no question. Do you think they have a shot in this game, and what are you looking for here?
I think the SEC generally has a shot to win every game.
Yeah.
Except maybe Bama and Michigan. I think that's just a horrific. I think that's a horrific matchup for 95.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
But I think that's the worst possible matchup for Alabama. But I think generally, if you're betting or picking the SEC in the tournament, you're going to be on the right side more often than not. Is kind of how I would break it down. I think a lot of points are going to be scored in this game. I think the over's fine. I think it's 167.5. I don't think you're really going to get many stops. I mean, Darius Acuff is an efficient player. He's just that good. I mean, I know people are talking about him now as a top 3 pick. Like, so while I think Arizona could arguably do the best possible job on him, I still think he's going to find ways to score and get involved. And you obviously have guys like Blake Thomas and Trey Richmond, who are again going to find ways to impact the game. I think on the Arizona side, I mean, this is the team that I've just kind of been resigned is probably going to cut down the nets just because of how they are built like they were made in a warehouse and in a factory, man. Like if you just picked like, all right, let me get the continuity point guard that's been here for 3 years, that's not selfish, that will, but can finish when the time is there, right? Let me also get let me get 3 bigs, who are tougher than anybody. And let me bring one guy off the bench who's been in college basketball, for 4 years, who loves coming off the bench and playing that role. Oh, and by the way, let me get this 6'8" international guy who's a freshman who can defend any position on the floor. And oh, by the way, let me go get a freshman 2 guard who can shoot 45% from 3 and finish, on the break. I mean, they just have been constructed. I don't really know where you go to attack them because, like, even though they don't shoot threes, they don't need threes, and they will make them. But they've just done the math at EvanMiya.com, and they have said, we think we can make 60% of twos. And 60% of twos is better to us than going 32.3% from 3. I don't know if that math checks out, but that's clearly what they've decided. So, I think Arkansas can certainly go, blow for blow with them for a time. But I think when you get into the final media timeout and you've been banging all day with Arizona and those bigs and that physicality, I think you just get worn down. So I like Arizona to win. Do they cover the number? I mean, that's the interesting thing. But I definitely think Arizona moves on to the Elite Eight.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult to stay with Arizona for a full 40. Obviously, Darius Acuff, I think I will never doubt him to be able to produce on the offensive end. But when you look at the rest of this roster, I mean, for starters, Arkansas has never played a defense as good as Arizona's this season. The only top 10 defense in the SEC is Florida, and Arizona's is 3rd best in the country. So between that and the fact that I think they're gonna throw everything at Darius Acuff, but 2, Arkansas is only playing 6 guys meaningful minutes right now, and there is a massive depth disadvantage to this Arizona team when you talk about Arizona having Toby Awaka coming off the bench, having Anthony Delorso. Dwayne Aristote has been amazing for them. They just have so many quality guys that they don't have to rely on one player. I do think that is going to be a major factor. And then, of course, the big factor with me with Arizona, clutchest team in the country, and they have been playing up to competition all season long. When they play the best teams, they are the best. Obviously, this is going to be one of the biggest game of the season for them. And so I think they're going to give Arkansas everything they can handle. If we go down to the Midwest region, you mentioned Michigan, Alabama, and that you think this is, it's going to be hard for Alabama to hang here. What are you seeing here, and why do you think that this is going to be a Michigan runaway?
Well, let me just stipulate first and foremost that I love this Alabama team with all my heart. I love them. I do. I love, I watch them basically every time they play.
LeBaron Philon's your favorite player in the country, right?
As you know, LeBaron Philon Jr. is my dude. And I truly think he's one of the 3 best guards in the country. I don't think he gets enough love in that conversation. But with that being said, when I think about, like the antidote and like the antithesis of Alabama basketball, and for them, it's Michigan. Because the closest thing to Michigan that Alabama has probably seen is Arizona. We know how that went. And Florida. And we know how that went. Those are 2 teams that play 3 bigs and can rotate them in and out. And that's exactly what Michigan is going to do. And Alabama just got absolutely squashed in those games. And, you're talking about, I just think, I know it ideally they'd have Bediako in this. I mean, I know if you were talking to NATO's, right? He'd have Bediako out there.
I can't believe you just did that.
But they've asked so much of Aiden Sherrill, and I think he's exceeded every expectation.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? But my guy is out there fighting for his life. He's the only big out there. You try to give Noah Williams some minutes, and it usually is a disaster. It's just a different level, right, than what he's used to. So I just think for those reasons, look, Alabama's going to come up with something. They're going to probably have to play zone, is my guess. Now, Michigan's going to have to match up with Alabama too now. I mean, those guards, we saw what they did against Texas Tech, 19 threes. It's going to be hot and heavy. It's, you're going to get constant pressure from that backcourt, and everybody can shoot. But I just feel like Michigan, and look, they're an appropriate 10.5-point favorite. I think they feel good about the matchup. And while I wish that LeBaron Philon, was still playing after this one, I think the road ends in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I do think Alabama could win this game, but it's certainly not the upset that I think is most likely to happen in this Sweet 16. A couple quick thoughts on this. I have Michigan favored by 16 points. That is a massive difference from Vegas. That's the rest of mine are all pretty close, but the main reasons are, number one, I do think the Holloway injury actually matters in this game. Even just from a bodies perspective, having the guys to keep up with Michigan, I do think that matters. Number two, Michigan, like Arizona, has played really, really well in their biggest games this season, and with very little let up. And Alabama has not been that. Like you mentioned, they have not done as well against the best teams on their schedule. I think that matters. And number three, this is kind of a niche one, but I think matters. Michigan has one of the better pace adjustments in the country when it comes to playing better in faster games. Alabama is number 2 in the country in tempo. They're going to give that straight to Michigan's hands. And I think in a game where Michigan is the better team, having more possessions, that goes right into Michigan's favor. So I think all that stuff matters. And I do think that Michigan will more likely than not take care of business. Last one in the Midwest region. We'll get to the other regions later on the show. Iowa State against Tennessee. I think this is going to, be of the games we've talked about, probably the closest one on paper. Iowa State hopefully will have Joshua Jefferson back for this game. If he is healthy, I have Iowa State favored by 5.5. Tennessee, though, as one of the more underseeded teams in this tournament as well as a 6, I think they're better than that. They've certainly showed that in their win over Virginia over the weekend. I think this is going to be a good one as well. What are you looking for in this one?
Yeah, to your point, they were a 1-point favorite, right, as a 6 seed over Virginia. They closed as a 1-point favorite. So obviously the market agrees with your assessment that they were underseeded. First of all, credit to Rick Barnes. This was not supposed to be a Sweet 16 year. This was sort of a rebuild. Now you got Nate Amen in there, so it wasn't going to be bad. But for them to be in the Sweet 16 is obviously a credit to his ability. I wonder a little bit what Iowa State, the way they were able to turn the water off on Kentucky. I know Kentucky's the game plan was that Kentucky would quit at some point. I don't think and that wasn't me saying that. That was Heisey saying that. But I think you could maybe look to duplicate some of the same things, right? What scares me about Tennessee is that, my God, man, they are probably the most top-heavy team in the country. Like, it's just non-negotiable. We talked about you got to get great Cam Boozer. You got to get great Jacoby Gillespie, or else you're going to get run out of the gym. I mean, and he's played awesome in this tournament.
Sure has.
But if we know that Iowa State is throwing the sink at him, they can do that with Lipsy and those guards and that physicality. So I haven't done anything with this game just because Tennessee has been such a wagon in this tournament. But I think I end up getting there with Iowa State. I don't expect Josh Jefferson to play. I don't have any information on that. But the guy was on a scooter in a boot. I mean, it just doesn't look like someone who's prepared to play in 5 days. So I still think Iowa State defensively could cause so much havoc on Tennessee, and I think they could ultimately pull away. I haven't done anything with it yet, though.
All right, before we get out of here, let's talk about one of the bigger narratives on this tournament. It was especially a headline as we got towards the end of Friday night and seeing the lack of upsets in the first round. Saturday and Sunday, we got a little bit more, especially in the flavor of Iowa knocking off Florida, and we're not going to have a completely chalk Final Four. But ultimately, the conversation around Cinderella, is she dead? Is she sleeping in this modern portal era, in the NIL era? Just factually, before I set you up for this, because I'm a numbers guy, and you're going to bring the vibes here, and I really want to see how you feel about this. Going into this tournament, according to my tournament simulations, we were predicted to get in the first round 4.4 upsets in the first round in terms of 10 seeds or worse winning. We ended up getting 4. So that was pretty close to expected. We were supposed to have a single 1 seed out by the Elite Eight. Florida is already out. We could possibly get another, but I think it's fair to say we expect for the other 3 more likely than not to get there. So that's relatively on par. Texas is our lone 10 seed or better, or worse if you rather, in the Sweet 16. And then, of course, Iowa. Neither of those teams are exactly true Cinderellas. Like High Point wasn't able to get there. VCU had won a game and then lost. We had some other close moments. Santa Clara almost beat Kentucky. Wright State and Siena had moments in their games. South Florida, gave Louisville a little bit of run. But a lot has been made about Cinderella. John, I know that you think about Cinderella all the time.
All the time, man.
Give me your thoughts. What is the state of college basketball here?
Well, first, let me ask you this. When you say, because I'm just trying to understand the concept.
Sure.
When you say that we were expected to get 4.4 upsets in the first round, we got 4. What is that based on? That is based on
how good all of these teams, not the historical precedent in the tournament, but rather based on the strength of the top heaviness of the teams this year and the widening gap. We were only expected to get that many. We got that many, but like this is how this has played out this year is both it's less upset heavy than previous years, but also based on the caliber of teams.
Right.
It's been about what we would expect going into this tournament, and that is just less upsets than we've seen in previous years. And potentially, if it were to play out to expectation, that would continue it going forward.
Well, do you? And I don't know if this is even possible, but like, how does that? Like, if I just picked out, 2014, what were the expected number of upsets, and you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Have they been pretty static? Have they gone down in terms of expectations?
Yeah, I don't have those specific numbers on hand, but anecdotally, it's more like 6-7 upsets in the first round compared to what we had 4 this year. So it's far below the usual expected amount, if you will.
Well, okay, so people need to understand. A couple of things about me, first and foremost. The version that you guys see of me on Field of 68 is most of the time is a very trumped up version of myself, right? Like I have fun. I bring a little BS. I bring in, I exaggerate my personality a lot. Just because that's show business, right? Like if you pull me to the side and we had a conversation, like whatever your opinion of me might be, it's very exaggerated is my point. And so when I go on here and I yell about Cinderella being dead, like I don't know if Cinderella is dead so much as the net has probably made all of this that much more efficient. So I sports bet. And so one of the things that just happens over time in any given market is it becomes more efficient. It just is the way I think, honestly, it hasn't caught up quite yet in the first round. I think that will happen. I think we're going to start getting more inflated numbers because these 16 seeds are just getting destroyed by these historically great teams. I mean, look at the numbers, right? I mean, look at the metrics, right? And I don't, you could probably pull up net ratings from 5 years ago and compare those metrics today. These teams are better. They are simply better. And so I think that's really as much as of anything else. And then you factor in too, yes, the NIL and rev share and transfer portal. So if you just imagine that college basketball and the tournament is a tree, you have all these different axes that are chipping away at it. It's not one thing. It's not, oh man, Cinderella is dead just because. It's Cinderella is dead because mid-majors get poached. It's because big-time, top-heavy teams have more money to spend than anybody else, and that gap only gets larger every single year. It's the fact that the net has not been around forever. I mean, we used to see these things based on RPI, which was bastardized and never quite right. So now we've got a better, more trustworthy and accurate process. And I think all these things, and then the portal, right? You just don't have continuity at some of these smaller schools. So I do think, it's just all these tiny axes. But I'll say this. I don't think the NCAA tournament, me personally, I don't need it to have upsets. You know what I mean? That's not what, I mean, can they be fun? Of course. But in the end, I want the best teams at the end. I want 4-1 seeds because that's what they earned over the course of a 35, 38 game, sample size. So look at the ratings. I think the news came out today that it's the best rating since 2011. And that's with 4 upsets in the first round. So it's not a thing where, oh man, college basketball is dead and I lament the way it is. It may be less fun for the casual because they want to see the St. Peter's and the Loyolas and et cetera. But for me, this is just me personally. People call me elitist, but I want to see the draft picks. I want to see the best brands. I want to see the best coaches. When we get to the Sweet 16 and you're a team that kind of if you were 16 and 15, but you got hot at the right time, I don't love that. I know that's part of the gig, but I don't love that. So it does not hurt my feelings in the slightest that we're getting to a more efficient NCAA tournament, just to bottom line it.
Yeah, I think all of that is, there's probably a lot of people who feel similarly to you. Just to kind of give some numbers to this, I'm hoping if I have time this week to actually do a full blog article kind of exposing where this change is coming from, especially looking from a roster talent perspective. But this is my kind of running theory right now, that not only is the gap between the true mid-majors and the high majors widening because of NIL and roster building stuff nowadays, I also think the gap between your generic high major team and the very best teams in the sport is also widening. And I think that is why not only are we seeing less first round upsets from true Cinderellas, but are also, relatively speaking, seeing less upsets in the second round, in the third round, and we're seeing more chalky Final Fours because there's also a separation there. And there's sort of a narrative of okay, if you have a chalky first round, it means for a great second round. Generally speaking, that's true, but I also think that gap there is also widening too. So if you look at going into this season, before we even knew exactly how this was going to unfold, if you look at the preseason ratings of all the teams at EvanMiya.com, and you look at the gaps between these groups over the last 10 years or so, the gap between, in the preseason, the gap between the top 10 teams in the country and the top true mid-majors has gotten bigger every single year in the last 5 years. So that gap is widening, which makes the likelihood of a first-round upset smaller. But additionally, there's a really big jump in the gap between even just an average top 30 high major team and mid-majors. That's more than doubled in its gap in the last 4 years. So it's basically the score between Texas and a true mid-major would be more than double the margin of victory now than it was 5 years ago. But also, the gap between the top 10 teams and the top 30 teams. So just within high major ranks, like you're talking about a 1 seed versus a 5 seed, that has also increased more in the last 3 years. It's much bigger in the last 3 than it was previously. So I think all of that data kind of goes to show that this tournament, the way it's headed with the way teams are able to optimize their rosters and there's a concentration of talent because of money available to those teams at the top, it is headed in a more chalky direction. I think the sell from the NCAA to the casual fan is that you show up to March and you see all of these upsets in the first round, and that's not gone, but it's way less likely, and that means that when we get it, it's going to feel more special, but the number per season, like we've talked about, is lower than it has been before. My question to you is, like, do you think this is going to continue, or do you think there would be any way that we'll sort of see a reversion to kind of what we've seen maybe 5-10 years ago?
I don't know how you go back. I mean, if you somehow capped the amount of times you could transfer, but like there's just no regulation whatsoever, and I'm not really sure there ever will be, because it's still amateur sports, Evan. Don't forget. I think, are we still going with that? I can't keep up. But yeah, I don't think it ever is going back. But I mean, I think the sell is just, hey, we never made any guarantees about this. Like, did we celebrate upsets? Of course we did, but we never guaranteed. This is not World Wrestling Entertainment. It's not professional wrestling. It's not scripted. It's 40-minute basketball games played by athletes, and usually the way these go is that the teams with better athletes are going to win the game. Now, it is a 40-minute game, and the three-point shot introduces a lot of variance. And and maybe someday we look up and there was a 16 seed that just had an unbelievable day from three and got it done. But yeah, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the days of, it felt like, and again, this is all anecdotal, right? I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's like, it felt like for a minute there, we were getting 1 versus 16. We were getting a 2 versus 15. Like, that felt regular enough. But no, I don't think there's any putting the toothpaste back in the tube. Not that I even want to. Again, I don't think it takes away from the tournament experience. I'm a guy that wants to see the best win. Like, that's, and that's why people hated me for what I said about Miami, Ohio, right? I became like a villain, and that's fine. Like, I'll stand on that opinion that I was never going to pretend like Miami was some great team. They were a team that took advantage of a weak schedule. And I'm not mad they got in. They didn't take any, like, I'm happy they got in over Auburn, for example. But in the end, I want to see the teams that are the best be there when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to get. Like, positive angle on this has been touted as the most talented season of college basketball we've had in a very long time. And we've really only had one of the top juggernauts get eliminated up to this point in Florida. We're going to have no matter who we get in the Final Four, we're going to have some incredible teams there, some incredible talent. It is going to be entertaining no matter what. It will deliver. I'm certain of that. And so we're going to have a lot of fun with that. John, I will see you next week at the Final Four in Indy. Until then, enjoy watching all the games this upcoming weekend. I'm really appreciative of you for joining the show today.
Next week, that's nuts.
I know.
Like, man, that is, and listen, I am glad that I could finally bring some nuance and analytics to this show. I think a lot of times, man, you just kind of delve too much into the opinion. And so it was smart of you to bring on somebody that my background is in math, right, and analytics. So I'm glad that I could offer some of that to your audience.
Man, I appreciate that, John. You're the best.
See you next week, brother.
I'll see you soon. Thank you to John Martin from Field of 68 joining me. You can catch him on a lot of the Field of 68 After Dark stuff. And in addition, he also runs a local radio show in Memphis talking about sports and all that stuff. So he's very glued in on Memphis, but certainly you'll see him a lot on Field of 68 stuff over the next couple weeks with the Final Four approaching and all that. So please go check out John Martin's stuff over there. Well, guys, as promised, there were some more great moments from this first weekend of the tournament that we need to get to, plus some more Sweet 16 matchups to preview. And with me to do that is Myron Medcalf, who has been doing fabulous work for ESPN for years. Myron, before we get to more of these specific games from this first weekend, just give me your overall impressions from the weekend. Number of upsets that we saw, big moments, how it's setting up for a Sweet 16. Did you have fun watching it? And overall, how did you feel about it overall?
I loved it. I thought we had some great action. I know a lot of people are claiming that they wanted more Cinderellas. I never actually believed that. I think you want the best 16 teams in the Sweet 16. And outside of Florida, I think we have that. Nothing against Iowa. But I do think it's been a great NCAA tournament. I don't know if it's NIL. I don't know if it's the portal alone. But the teams at the top are very, very good, and they're getting better. And I think that, to me, is the story of what we've seen in the first couple of rounds.
Yeah, I think when you have if one seed go down in Florida before the Sweet 16, it reminds you that anything is possible in this tournament. But ultimately, we are getting a lot of really, really great matchups in the Sweet 16. And there have been a lot of huge moments to get to that where the good teams have, come close to going out, but ultimately have found their way there. One of the biggest moments from the first weekend for me, without a question, was on Sunday, the St. John's, Kansas finish. This game was not that entertaining in the first half. I think I sent out a tweet saying that this was, pretty horrific watch. And it was that, but I think that was both teams establishing their defensive identity. St. John's certainly has done that all season. But then all of a sudden, St. John's was up 13 points with about under 7 minutes left. Kansas goes on a 16-4 run. Darren Peterson down 2 gets to the line with 13 seconds left to tie it. And then you have this weird situation where Kansas only had, I think, 2 fouls in the second half at that point. So they were able to smartly kind of keep fouling and chopping that clock down. They foul 4 times. We get down to 3.9 seconds. And Dylan Darling has the first true buzzer beater that we've had this tournament, driving to the lane, releasing the ball. It's a layup. And Rick Pitino's statement on this was so funny. Because basically Dylan Darling in the huddle called his own number. Pitino's like, okay, that's cool. But then he realizes he hasn't scored a bucket all game. But he says, hey, that's Bells, referring to a moment earlier in the season, talking about just how big in the moment Dylan Darling is. Dylan Darling finishes this game with 2 points. That was his only points of the entire game. Just what an incredible ending, and a game that was a rock fight between two great ball clubs. Ultimately, St. John's gets their way to the Sweet 16. Just your thoughts on that incredible finish there.
I mean, that's what the NCAA tournament is. Like, you never see that in the NBA. Like, you never see a guy who hadn't scored all game go to a head coach and say, hey, give me a chance. Like, it just doesn't happen. But in college basketball, it can. And in a way, look back, how smart was that by Pitino? Bill Self wasn't anticipating that. Bill Self is thinking, I'm sure, who is Darling going to pass it to? Who's the open man? Who's the one that we should fear? Bryce Hopkins had this incredible day shooting 3-pointers. I think he was 6 for 9. They're going to kick it out to him. So straight line drive to win the game at the buzzer was just fascinating. And I think it just shows what can happen at this level that really doesn't happen in the NBA. I also think it made me think of something that Bill Self told me last month when I went down to Lawrence to do a piece on all of the Darren Peterson stuff and just the team. And he talked about the lack of chemistry. And the line that he told me was, when we hit real adversity, have we been through enough together to respond to that? And I think that, to me, is what you saw throughout the season with Kansas. And I think you saw it on that last play that looked like a team that was lost in some ways. And people are saying, oh, Darren Peterson should have more court awareness. It was on him. I think it was an entire team that was trying to go, what do we do? And that's a lack of reps. I think that's the lack of chemistry they've been dealing with all season, whereas you have a St. John's team that's lost 1 game in almost 2 months. That's the difference.
Yeah, and St. John's, came into this tournament as one of the hottest teams in the field. It has not played that way out for every team that has come into the tournament hot. Like, some of them have flamed out. Other teams like Texas, who struggled to get across the line, are now find themselves in the Sweet 16. But for St. John's, it is so clear that they are better than your typical 5 seed. And there's a reason they were favored in this game against Kansas. And like you mentioned, just the lack of rhythm for Kansas. I don't think this was a failure of a season for them. I think Bill Self managed to get through all of the ups and downs of this team without them kind of falling off the map, they were pretty consistent overall as a top 20 team nationally with all of the Darren Peterson stuff going on. And ultimately, yes, a disappointing ending, but I mean, it's Rick Pitino versus Bill Self for Sweet 16. Only one of them can get there. It ultimately, Kansas came close. In this game, though, obviously we talked about Dylan Darling, but Zuby Ejiofor, obviously their best player, had 18 points. Bryce Hopkins also had 18 points. All of those came from three-pointers. Bryce Hopkins had 6 threes in this game. His previous high this year was 3. So that is monstrous for this team to get that level of production, and for Pitino to start calling stuff late for Hopkins to keep shooting threes just shows how confident he was. And I love that he's able to have different guys in different spots that, between Ejiofor, Darling, Hopkins, all kind of in their own way, being so assertive. It really does bode well for them. And I'll just go ahead and cue you up on this. Massive matchup against Duke. Obviously, it's a 1v5, so this is not going to be a matchup where it's likely to be a coin flip going in. But if we're talking about any 5 seed that could knock off a 1, it could be St. John's. What are your initial thoughts on that game and just what St. John's has done to put themselves in such a good position here?
I think it starts with Shire versus Pitino. If you're John Shire, you coach next to Coach K. You were coached by Coach K. I don't think you're intimidated by anyone or anything. But this is going up against one of the GOATs in the sport. And I'm sure if you're John Shire, you're going, if anyone's going to have a game plan to slow Cam Boozer down and to make someone else try to beat us, it's Rick Pitino. I think the physicality of St. John's is an X factor. Like, those are like real dudes, like big, strong, older guys. And if you watch Cam Boozer, as you have, I think people don't appreciate how physically strong he is. I did a piece on him last month, and everyone I talked to, all these coaches, all these players who've played against him, people who've coached against him, that was the thing, right? His ability to just will his way to the basket. Obviously, he draws a ton of fouls, gets to the free throw line. He's a 6'9" force. And I think St. John's has the bodies to really frustrate him. So can they turn to someone else? Is it Isaiah Evans getting to the basket the way that he did in the second half against TCU? Is Caleb Foster going to try to come back? And if he does, is he healthy? Patrick Gungba, how healthy will he be? Looks like he was still kind of working his way back in their last game. But I think St. John's, at least from a defensive perspective, I think they're built to compete with Duke. Now the question is, Bryce Hopkins was a 31% three-point shooter before that win over Kansas. If everyone regresses to the mean, that's not a great three-point shooting team. So if St. John's is St. John's, do they have the offensive firepower to beat a team like Duke? So it's a really incredible matchup at all levels.
It truly is, and I can't wait to see what this whole Pitino versus John Shire matchup looks like. Old blood versus new blood, if you want to call it that. And something I'm watching in this game, St. John's, if you go back to their Big East tournament championship game against UConn, they started that game with an opening 10-0 run, which I've now called it an ambush. They did the same thing in their first round matchup against Northern Iowa, and then against Kansas, I think they opened on an 8-0 run. It's been 3 straight games where they have just immediately, between their offense and the full court pressure that they put on teams, just absolutely asserted their will and taken control of the game. Doing that against Duke will be the hardest of all those teams, but St. John's has been successfully just putting things in their favor early. How will Duke respond to that? It's really tough to simulate the type of defensive pressure and intensity that St. John's has. So that's going to be something I'm watching. Obviously, Cam Boozer will be the best player in this game, but Zuby Ejiofor, that matchup is going to be awesome. Something that is, the part of the reason why I have Duke favored by 9 points in this game, even though I think a lot of people might suggest it'll be closer than that, is St. John's. Look, this has not been their best offensive year, and we saw that they struggled offensively, especially down the stretch against Kansas and early on in the first half. And Kansas is a defense that's, I think, ranked 11th in the country on my site. They're going to be facing Duke that has the second best defense in the country. So will St. John's be able to keep up with Duke, even if they were able to establish their defensive identity? Will they be able to keep up with Duke offensively? I think that could be a big factor in this game. But, I think they're certainly capable of it. Another moment in the first round that I want to, or the first weekend I want to talk about a little bit is, that we haven't gotten to yet, is this run from High Point. High Point was the Cinderella the last real Cinderella that we had, if you will, true mid-major school. They beat Wisconsin 83-82 in just a thriller of a game. And then ultimately they come up short against Arkansas, but it was tied at 83 with 3 minutes to go. I loved watching this team. I loved the nation falling in love with this team over the course of this weekend. What stuck out to you about High Point's weekend here and just kind of the maybe higher referendum on the one mid-major school, true mid-major, that was able to really, have this type of performance in this tournament?
I think we use the word mid-major with this sort of broad brush, and I think we decide that there are 40 good teams in college basketball and 320 plus teams that just aren't on that level. I think we forget how much good basketball is out there. Listen, the crime of a lot of the guys who are at these mid-majors is they're not 6'5". I mean, that's Rob Martin's issue. He's not 6'5". Like, that's the only thing you can tell me that's difference between him and the top guys we see at the Power 4 level. And I think we look down on sometimes teams like that. High Point was the best offensive and defensive team in league play. They won a ton of games. They forced a lot of turnovers. They were a good team top to bottom. And that didn't change in the NCAA tournament. So I think as much it was a shock for a lot of people, I don't think it was a shock for High Point that they put themselves in that position. And let's be honest, the difference between High Point and Arkansas is Darius Acuff Jr. maybe being the best point guard that Calipari's ever coached. And that says a lot for a guy like that. So I just think we got to stop with these categories, and we have to start watching the games, paying attention to the metrics, and giving teams credit where it's due. Because High Point was a good team. No, they're not playing an SEC schedule to prove it. No, they're not playing a Big Ten schedule to prove it. But the action that they were running, they could have done that against a lot of teams. And they battled a really good SEC team down to the final minute. So I was impressed, but I think there are more teams like High Point that we just make assumptions about, and I don't think that's fair.
I agree with that. And when you come into a tournament as one of the only teams with 30-plus wins, there's something to be said for that. And, Flynn Clayman talked about it, in one of his things he said after the game of like, we won 22 straight and the metrics didn't really count for that. Ultimately, they had this sort of X factor that I think, maybe was underappreciated by the general public of their ability to win. The two stars for High Point over this weekend were Rob Martin, who had 23 points and 10 assists in their win over Wisconsin. And then he was just willing them to stay with Arkansas, 30 points in that game. And then, of course, Chase Johnston, who was kind of the Jack Golke of this tournament, if you will, of his just crazy threes. And I think the stat for him was his three-point rate coming into this tournament in terms of the percentage of shots that he's taking that are threes was 97.4%. That's almost identical to Jack Golke's at Oakland in that final year. He shot almost 50% from three this year, and he had 4 huge ones in their first round game, several against their game against Arkansas. Both those guys were just amazing. What were your takeaways watching them?
How well they knew each other. Like to me, when you see Rob Martin, undersized guard, you could tell all those plays, all those actions he'd run a million times before, and you could just see the confidence in that. Right? Him coming off those high screens, getting to the basket. He knew, right? Like, that's just basketball. They're just a good basketball team. And I think with Chase, a guy that confident to shoot that many threes, and for a coach to give a player that opportunity to just come in and be a legit three-point shooter because you're so good at it says so much about his value as well. So I just think you saw a High Point team that was so comfortable in the stuff that they were running. And you watch Arkansas late, you can tell Arkansas is a little worried down the stretch of that game because they're running the same stuff. Rob Martin is 5'9", 10, 11 on a great day, and he's getting downhill on an SEC team that battled Alabama and all the biggest teams in college basketball with ease. That's just a team that knows its stuff, and they ran it over and over and over again. So I just think they were creatures of habit. And I think that was just cool to see because High Point did that against really good teams, and we got to give them credit for just putting themselves in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, two first-round moments that I do want to make sure we touch on here. Kentucky over Santa Clara, definitely the best game of the first round. As this game was unfolding, before we even got to the late game stuff, I was already saying this has been the best game of the first round. The largest lead in this game by any team was 7. Kentucky led by 7. Santa Clara led by 4. And with 18 seconds left, we get this crazy, amazing sequence that will live on in history. 18 seconds left, Kentucky has the ball down by 2, and Owe ends up getting a flare screen. He gets the ball, he gets the bucket, and he has just been the most dominant player in that game. They tie the game, 10 seconds left. Alan Graves for Santa Clara gets the ball on the wing and hits the huge 3 with 2.4 seconds to go. The quick inbounds, Owe releases the ball at the left side of the logo, very similar to that famous Steph Curry shot against Oklahoma City. 3.3 seconds remaining, the ball is off his hand. It goes in off the backboard into the bucket. And one of the things that came out after this game shortly was the clock not starting on time, Herb Sendek trying to call a timeout. Ultimately, for me, as a non-biased viewer of this game, stuff like this happens. And ultimately, there was other things that, Kentucky still made a very difficult shot to take it to overtime. Ultimately, they win this game, and Brandon Garrison had 3 huge blocks in overtime. Kentucky ultimately didn't make it out of the first weekend, but that was an incredible game. What were your overall thoughts as you were watching this unfolding live?
It was fun. I mean, that Ortega always shot. I mean, he double pumps it. I don't know how he hits it, but it was incredible.
Crazy.
And the Herb Sendek, I know we got a lot about the timeout. Here's the thing that doesn't make sense to me, Evan, and maybe you can explain it. Why aren't we fouling up 3? Like, why are you giving anyone the possibility of hitting a shot like that and tying the game at the end of regulation? Why not foul? If you put Kentucky in that situation where they're fouled at the free throw line, what are the chances that they get to 3 points to tie the game and you go into overtime? So I just wonder why coaches outside of games tell us all the time, this is what works, and then don't do it in the game. But you got to give Kentucky a lot of credit just for the way they finished. They've kind of been up and down all year. And Ortega Owe is going to go down as a guy who never won as much as I'm sure he wanted to, but was just a really incredible player, and that moment solidified it.
Yeah, Owe finished this game with 35 points, 8 rebounds, and 7 assists. That's the first high major player in not just the tournament, in any game, first high major player to get that in a Division I game since Trae Young in 2018. Obviously, we know the kind of player Trae Young is. Incredible performance from him. And then Brandon Garrison, I mentioned it. He finished this game with 6 blocks and 7 rebounds. Owe and Garrison being the 2 key returners for this team amongst a bunch of other, incoming players. And of course, a lot of criticism about this roster as a whole. But for both of those guys to, finish out the season with those big moments, Garrison, I think, had 3 massive blocks in overtime that were just huge against, Santa Clara's point guard there. So that was really awesome. And then another big upset in the first round, if you want to call it that, was VCU beating North Carolina. And the big part about this game was it was supposed to be a close game. UNC looked totally in control. They were up 19 points with about 15 minutes to go. If you looked on ESPN, the probability that UNC was going to win that game at that point was about 99%. So we're talking one of the most crazy comeback wins in NCAA tournament history. Goes to overtime. VCU ends up winning it in overtime. Both teams look really gassed down the stretch. VCU just had a little bit more left in the tank. Terrence Hill off the bench was the big performer in this game. 34 points, 5 boards, 5 assists. If you look at the last 10 tournaments, Ortega Owe had a performance like that. And outside of that, it's just been Cooper Flagg, RJ Davis, and Miles McBride who have ever had that level, those 34 points, 5 boards, 5 assists in a game. Henry Vasar was great, but ultimately comes up short. The lack of Caleb Wilson was going to bite them at some point. I thought VCU was a really fun team. They end up proving it in this game. What were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think you got to give VCU and Phil Martelli Jr., who, I think this is his 3rd year as a head coach. It just keeps finding ways to win. It's been remarkable to watch that. And when you come up, your dad's been a coach at the highest level. In situations just like that, I'm sure that gives you a lot of confidence. They didn't break, and if you watch VCU in the A-10, they had a bunch of games like that. They had a bunch of moments where they had to showcase that resilience. And I thought North Carolina got really comfortable. Any team would, up 19 points. But then all of a sudden, when VCU is chipping away at that lead, you can just see a team that's almost searching for a way to get Caleb Wilson off the bench. Who's going to save us? Henry Vasar was great, then made some mistakes late. It just was a team that fell apart, and we've watched that happen at North Carolina too many times under Hubert Davis, which is why I think he's in a situation he's in. I think teams in that moment take a lot from their coaches in terms of how confident they are, and you could literally just watch the confidence leaving North Carolina's faces as VCU is just getting more and more confidence to launch that comeback. So, fun game, but if you're a North Carolina fan, you got to be furious about how that ended.
Let me get your thoughts on this. With the Hubert Davis situation, we're recording this on a Monday. The speculation is that there's a decent chance that North Carolina will separate with Hubert Davis, but that's not confirmed at the time of recording. And then, of course, the conversation comes if this job opens, who's in that? So I just want to get your thoughts on this because I know that you're tracking this closely. Like, do you think this would be the right move for North Carolina to let go of Hubert Davis? And if so, what do you think their prospects are in terms of a new coach here?
Yeah, I mean, if you're North Carolina, I don't think anyone can be happy with the results, right? I mean, this is a team that gets to the national championship game in Hubert's first year, which probably hurt him long term to start that way, and they have a double-digit lead on Kansas, and then they don't win, and everything that followed from there. I think North Carolina has to decide who it wants to be in the NIL era. North Carolina isn't North Carolina anymore. I don't think Kentucky's Kentucky. I don't think the brand names matter the way that they did. Like, I'm hearing people talk about Dusty May potentially as a candidate for North Carolina. Why would Dusty leave Michigan? He can win championships there. Todd Golden, outside of the giant buyout, why would he leave Florida? So I think if you're North Carolina, you've got to decide to start fresh. I know there's the whole thing about the legacy, and that's great. You can't win off legacy today. And most of the kids you're recruiting have no idea what you did 30 years ago. And I know North Carolina's won more recently, but I think they have to adapt to the times. And whoever they bring in, if they bring in someone new or if they keep Hubert, that has to be a priority.
All right, let's preview a couple more Sweet 16 games here. We already touched on Duke St. John's in the East. The other one is going to be a brilliant matchup between UConn and Michigan State. Dan Hurley versus Tom Izzo, two of the greatest coaches in the sport, both who have incredible, irrational confidence in their team, who have gotten their groups to perform really well recently and on the course of this season. Right now, I have UConn favored by 1.5. I think that lines up with where Vegas is at. Both of these teams this year have done an incredible job of playing up to competition. In other words, they save their best performances for the biggest opponents. This is the biggest performance, the biggest stage. I think this could go either direction. Certainly my prediction here of, UConn 70, Michigan State 69 would suggest that. What are you looking for in this matchup? And what do you think is going to be the deciding factor here?
Well, I think when we get to this stage, to me, I always want to know what's your plan B, because we know every team's going to need it. Your star's going to miss shots. Someone's going to get in early foul trouble. Something's going to go wrong in the first half of this game. What's your plan B? And I think UConn just has more. Terrace Reed Jr. is who they should play through. Like, when he realizes how dominant he can be, UConn is a force, and he can be consistent. Obviously, having a veteran like Alex Caravan, I think Braylon Mullins is starting to figure out who he can be within this team. I mean, anytime you win the way that they did in solo ball and Silas Demery basically didn't show up, 2 points combined, that says a lot about UConn. Whereas on the Michigan State side, Jeremy Fears has to be great. He has to control the game and the tempo on both sides of the floor. And if that doesn't happen, I don't see how Michigan State wins. Everything they do comes off of what Jeremy Fears does. They've been hitting threes lately. I do think that's something to watch. Michigan State being a better shooting team than I think maybe people realize over the last month and a half. But just UConn has so many ways to say, all right, this isn't working, we'll turn to this. This isn't working, we'll turn to that. I think Michigan State has fewer ways to do that if they find themselves in trouble early.
That is a great point, because everything through Michigan State goes through Jeremy Fears, and he's one of the best players in the country. He's one of the most indispensable players in the country, and he has been very successful almost every single game this season. But if he's not playing well, or if UConn figures a way to take that away, where does this team go? And you also just look down the roster on this team, and it's like, clearly the depth on this team is not as good as UConn's. But I do think Jeremy Fears will be the best player on that court, and so his ability to control that game will be notable. Obviously, you mentioned Silas Demery and Jalen Stewart, who were absent in their first game. Terrace Reed basically took that game over against Furman. They played on Sunday, but were minutes restriction. The hope is, I think, that they'll be fully healthy for this game, But, having them healthy and playing well, I think will be crucial in this one. If we go down to the South Regional, you're going to be in Houston for this. The Illinois-Houston matchup, kind of a semi-home situation for Houston in their home city, obviously. To me, this has been the biggest Sweet 16 game I've penciled before we knew how any of this was going to unfold. If Illinois and Houston made it to that Sweet 16 matchup, for me, this is the most enticing Sweet 16 game that we're going to have, and I am so thrilled to be getting this game. I have Houston favored by 2.5. I think that's deserved based on the merits of what they've done this season, but both of these teams are now, the winner of this team looks like the most likely team to go to the Final Four out of this region. The stakes feel immense. So what are your thoughts on this game here?
Well, it's going to feel like a home game in Houston for the Cougars, right? So I think that crowd will be an advantage for them. Illinois is going to show up as well. I just think this, to me, looks similar to last year's team, maybe with more talent in the backcourt with Kingston Flemings. I don't think they're as great in the post, but I think this is just a really, really good Houston team. Again, defensively, the way that they can just shut your water off, I think that'll be the challenge against Illinois. If that happens, if guys aren't hitting shots because that defensive pressure is so intense, what does Illinois turn to? And I think Houston has the ability to really slow them down, control the tempo. And when you talk to people about Houston and playing Houston, they talk about just the physically bruising style. Like those guys just really make it hard to get to your spots. Everyone can hold their individual matchups. They don't have to send help because they trust everyone on the floor. Now, the flip side is, can Houston win a track meet with Illinois? These scoring droughts, I think, have to be the most troubling thing when you look over the course of Houston's matchups against good squads.
Yes.
Because if it's a tight game and Illinois goes on a run, Houston can get left behind. And I don't think they're equipped for comebacks. And I think that's the worst case scenario for Kelvin Sampson. They're suddenly down 9 points with 7 minutes to play, and they just don't have a gear that they can hit to catch up.
Yeah, I think ultimately Illinois' offensive ceiling, you could argue, might be better than any team in the country in terms of what they're able to pull off. They're going against the number 1 ranked defense in the country, according to EvanMiya.com. So that is going to be an absolute enjoyable matchup to watch unfold. And then for me personally, Kingston Flemings and Keaton Wagler have kind of been the 2 surprise freshmen all season. I have viewed them very similarly in my minds in terms of just being so amazed by what they've done. Now we get to see them on a Sweet 16 stage playing against each other. I cannot wait for that one. So that's going to be great. And then the other matchup, which is maybe a little bit more of a surprise, Iowa beats Florida. Their matchup against Nebraska. It's the Battle of the Cornfields. One of these teams is going to be in the Elite Eight playing for a Final Four berth. It is absolutely incredible that we have this matchup here. And hey, Nebraska is a 4 seed. Iowa's a 9, but they are a lot closer in talent and skill level and strength than what those seeds might say. I have Nebraska favored by 2.5 in this game. So it's going to be pretty, like, it could easily go either direction. And so ultimately, Iowa's going to have Bennett Sturts, who has been controlling games for them. He was, okay against Florida, but ultimately made the right plays on the stretch. On the Nebraska side, it's just filled with a roster of guys who are selfless and do what the team needs. Obviously led by, Sam Hoiberg, Price Sanford, Rink Mass, but there's so many guys on this team. I can't wait for this matchup. Any thoughts on this one here?
Well, I think it was hard to get any attention in the Big Ten if you weren't Michigan, Michigan State, Illinois being sort of a surprise team. So Wisconsin and what they did, those big road wins. So I don't know how much people actually watched Iowa and Nebraska. I think the narrative of Iowa was they came into the NCAA tournament on this really rough stretch. But if you look at them for the first 3 months of the season, they were hitting shots. They were a good offensive team before they hit sort of that roadblock. And now we're seeing them play better again. So I think overall, this is a good team that's finding its way. Again, you beat Florida. That says a lot about who you are. And then I think with Nebraska, we talk about all the great defensive teams you've seen in the NCAA tournament so far. Nebraska was the best defensive team in Big Ten play. And I think you're seeing that as well. The way that they just really corralled Tyler Tanner down the stretch. Not the last shot where he almost hits it, but when they box him in on the baseline in the go-ahead bucket before that, that's Nebraska's identity. They can defend, they can hit big shots. So I'm just excited to see it.
Yeah, both of these teams are so connected as a group. Nebraska, certainly, that's part of why they went so far into the season undefeated. But Iowa as well, especially this time of year, they're playing so well together. And, I mentioned it before the tournament, Iowa was one of the more underseeded teams going into this tournament of they're stronger than their 9 seed. They certainly showed that against Florida. Would not be a shock at all if they beat Nebraska in this game. Either way, we're going to have a really, really fun game against the winner of Illinois-Houston. You'll be on hand for all of it. Myron, thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you in a little over a week at the Final Four in Indianapolis, but until then, I really hope you enjoy the games in Houston this weekend. Thank you to Myron Medcalf, who has done a great job for years at ESPN. I have been following his work for such a long time, and he just does incredible work on the writing side, especially for ESPN, but really everything that they're doing over there. So please go check out his work. He's got a lot of content coming out about the tournament, coming into the tournament, and now, of course, being boots on the ground for Houston in the South Regional, which is going to be just incredibly fascinating. So please stay tuned to what he's doing as he's covering the sport, especially for that regional there. All right, it is time for our analytics corner today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's already been a very full show, but a lot of the bracket advice that I gave last week for filling out brackets has turned out to be fairly good so far through the first weekend. My bracket right now is in the 99.6th percentile, I think, amongst all brackets, which is definitely the best that I've ever done. 99.8th percentile. So that's been great. I think one of the key things that's really been helpful for me and a lot of other people who listen to the show was outlining the underseeded teams going into this tournament. If you remember from last week's episode, I mentioned that underseeded teams, which are teams that are much better than their seed line, win 69% more games than other teams on the same seed line going in based on, being identified going into the tournament and looking at the past 10 years or so. This year's underseeded teams list has gone really well. The first thing is that if you look at all the teams in the Sweet 16 and you look at the 4 teams in the Sweet 16 that are surprises based on seed line. So in other words, the 4 teams that are not a 1 through 4 seed, that would be 5 seed St. John's, 6 seed Tennessee, 9 seed Iowa, 11 seed Texas. All 4 of those teams were on the underseeded list of teams that I gave, which is about 13 long. Before this tournament, all of them are in the Sweet 16. That is awesome. So running down the list here, St. John's, underseeded as a 5 seed. They're in the Sweet 16. They're matched up against Duke. Vanderbilt, underseeded as a 5. They almost beat Nebraska. They win a game as a 5 seed. Tennessee, underseeded as a 6, gets to the Sweet 16. Louisville, the other 6 that was on this list, wins 1 game, loses to Michigan State. That's a good performance from them. Ohio State, as an 8, was on this list. They lost their first game, so they did not reach their potential here. But Iowa, as a 9, underseeded, beats Florida to get to the Sweet 16. That is awesome to see. And then Texas, as an 11, is in the Sweet 16 after winning 3 games in 5 days. And they were the most underseeded 11 on the board. Not surprising to see them in the Sweet 16. That's really cool. There were a few other 11s on the list. NC State obviously played Texas, so only one of those teams could get even to the round of 64. SMU won their opening game against Miami, Ohio. And then VCU, as an 11 seed, straight in the field, knocked off North Carolina. They were also on the board. The other 3 teams on this list were Hofstra as a 13. They obviously lost to a very good Alabama team. And then there were 2 16 seeds on this list. UMBC, nothing noteworthy there, but Siena, as a 16 seed, really had Duke in a bit of a bind for a lot of their first-round game. They had a fantastic performance as a 16. So looking at this list, this turned out really, really good, at least through this first weekend, in terms of looking at teams who could kind of outperform their seed. And so very cool to see the performance from those teams there on the underseeded list. So we'll continue to monitor that in future seasons. But very happy to see that those teams, have done so well so far in the tournament. There's a lot of other stuff from this weekend that we haven't even really touched on at length yet. So before we get out of here, I just want to briefly mention a few other noteworthy results, kind of from going from top to bottom on my bracket here. Michigan State, not really a lot of issues getting to the Sweet 16. They win by 8 over Louisville. Jeremy Fears had 16 assists in this game. He just continues to be an absolute maestro on the ball. I think he is the best playmaker in college basketball this year. He's rated that way at EvanMiya.com. Cohen Carr, 21 points, 10 rebounds, a huge effort from him. UConn, their next matchup, they got past UCLA without a lot of issues, especially as they had 2 second-half kill shots, which has been something the Huskies have struggled a little bit with this year, but that was huge in the second half. Alex Caraban, their veteran leader, 27 points. Terrace Reed had a nice game here, but it was really his first round effort against Furman. I loved watching this UConn-Furman game. Furman gave them everything. UConn ultimately pulled away late. Terrace Reed had 31 points and 27 rebounds. Just a Herculean effort by him. I'm looking forward to seeing his matchup against Michigan State. Kind of in the bottom of the bracket, Illinois and Houston both looked really awesome, handling business comfortably. That matchup is going to be amazing, amazing television in the Sweet 16. Arizona, comfortably in control pretty much the whole time against Utah State, though it was semi-close at times. But Jaden Bradley continues to hit big shots, and Mo Krivas has become more and more impactful as the season has gone along. He is one of the most impactful big men in the sport this year, and Arizona continues to be one of the most, maybe the most reliable team in the sport in clutch in terms of closing out games. So I think that they are going to have a great matchup against Arkansas, but have a really tough time seeing them losing that game. Purdue wins by 10 over Miami. Despite a Braden Smith not great game, he broke the NCAA record for assists in their first game against Queens, but he had 8 turnovers in this game. But Fletcher Loyer had 24 points. TKR had 19. So if Braden Smith cleans it up a little bit, I think that they're going to be in a good spot against Texas. That'll be a fun matchup. Bottom right of the bracket, Michigan kind of utterly dominated St. Louis in the stretch run of the second half. They looked really, really, really good and will be really tough for anyone in that region to take down. Alabama kind of completely shellacked Texas Tech. 90-65 was the final score. Alabama was 19 for 42 from 3 in this game. Just a vintage Alabama shooting performance, obviously without one of their arguably 2 best players in Aiden Holloway. Not a problem in the first weekend. Reitzel had 6 threes. JT Toppin missing for Texas Tech does ultimately come back to bite them and limit how far they can go. I do think that this would have been a much more competitive game if he were there. It was only going to be a matter of time before Texas Tech ultimately kind of came up short, and it was obvious what they were missing without their key star player there. So bummer for them, but they did the best they could without him down the stretch this season. Tennessee wins 79-72 over Virginia. This was a very good game. My takeaway from this is Jacoby Gillespie. I think he has continued to be this season one of the most underrated players in the country. Tennessee has never been a team that's relied incredibly on one player over another, but Jacoby Gillespie has kind of taken the mantle of the Rick Barnes point guard who does everything. He had 21 points and 6 assists in this game, and right now if you go to EvanMiya.com and you look at the most valuable players in the country according to Bayesian performance rating, Jacoby Gillespie is the 5th best player in the country. That's the best player in the SEC. He's behind Cameron Boozer, Yaxel Lendeborg, Braden Smith, and Jeremy Fears. He is so vital to what Tennessee does, and I hope that as they continue in this tournament with their matchup against Iowa State, that he continues to get more love because he has been so important for the Vols. And then last game, Iowa State 82, Kentucky 63. The big question here was how Iowa State was going to handle Kentucky without Joshua Jefferson. They just had a 1-point halftime lead. Ultimately, they just kind of took over this game late. Tamin Lipsey has really continued to step up and do whatever Iowa State needs, especially without Joshua Jefferson. He finished with 26 points, 10 assists, and 5 steals. Lipsey is one of the best, perimeter defensive guards in the country, and he is always causing havoc there. 5 steals there shows up for him. Milan Machilovic had 20 points. So a great game for them. I think their matchup against Tennessee is going to be very interesting. Just 5 bench points in this game without Joshua Jefferson for Iowa State. They're going to need more from their bench if they're going to be able to get past Tennessee and have a shot at the winner of Michigan and Bama. But a very comfortable win for them. And that matchup against Tennessee is going to be a really, really good one for sure. Before we get out of here, I just want to say once again, I just thought this first weekend was really incredible. There were so many good moments. And for me personally, I also just had a lot of fun watching it. I had a really, really cool setup. My good buddy Chad and his family, they have a really, really sweet March Madness setup that they do for at least the first weekend of every year, where it's in their basement. There are 4 massive, 5 or 6 massive televisions. They have 3 rows of couches kind of in stadium seating format where you have a front row on the ground, a second row higher up, and a third row even higher up after that. and they have an exclusive guest list of people. They provide food the entire weekend. It is a basketball watcher's heaven. And so getting to do that with a lot of friends of mine over the weekend was awesome. So shout out to Chad and his group over there. Also, the show last week for the mega bracket breakdown and some of the other stuff I did really got a lot of great reviews and a ton of engagement. As predicted, the March Madness show is always going to be the biggest of the year. But for me, this is the first season I'm doing this podcast. Just seeing the amount of people who came and listened on podcast channels, watched on YouTube, it was extraordinary just seeing the audience that this got. So if you're new and still here after last week, I appreciate you being here. This has been a really fun journey this season, and just wanted to read out a few reviews, as I do from time to time, to just thank some of you guys who have been sharing this and listening and all that sort of stuff. So on Apple, we've got one from Aronin12 who said, A+, best bracket overview I've heard. And from J Perry 71, amazing data and analysis. No one is better than Evan at pulling the data together for college basketball and then explaining it to us. Thank you to you guys. And on YouTube, there were so many comments. I'll just pick out a few. At TrillP_ said, this is magnificent work. At InnoPVA9973 said, interesting stuff here. Well done with this. And at Daniel Shim 6434 said, brilliant insight. First time I've ever watched March Madness prognostications instead of reading it. I really appreciate that. And I have had a lot of fun kind of using this long form format of a podcast and a show to explain this stuff further rather than just putting out a single tweet or doing a blog article. So that's been really cool. Thank you all again so much for listening. That is a wrap for our show today. I hope you enjoyed it. We are back next Tuesday to go over the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 action and preview the Final Four. I will be boots on the ground in Indianapolis for that next week. So we'll have that show next Tuesday. As always, this is an ad-free show. So please help support the show by giving us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. If you watch on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. There are a lot of people who watch this who are not subscribed. Just click the button. That really helps grow the channel. Again, thank you guys so much for listening. It truly means a ton to you, to me, and I will see all of you guys next time.